Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. Chapter 1. Down the Rabbit Hole. Alice was sitting on the grass by her sister, who was reading a book. Alice didn't like the book because there were no pictures in it. "What's the use of a book without pictures in it?" thought Alice. "Shall I get up and go to pick some flowers, or shall I not? No, the day is too hot. Oh, I'm so sleepy." Suddenly a white rabbit with pink eyes ran past her. "Oh, I shall be late, I shall be late," he cried. A rabbit that can talk! Alice didn't think it very funny at first. But when the rabbit took a watch out of its pocket and looked at it, Alice jumped to her feet. She started after the rabbit. It ran to a rabbit hole in the ground and jumped into it. Alice went down after it at once. But she didn't go down the hole. She fell. She fell down, down, down. She was falling very slowly, so she had time to think and to look about. At first she tried to look down and see what was in the hole, but it was too dark and she could see nothing. Then she looked at the walls and saw a lot of shelves on them. There were maps and pictures here and there. On one of the shelves she saw a jar. She took it from the shelf and read, "Marmalade." But there was no marmalade in it. She didn't want to drop the jar. She was afraid to kill somebody. She was still falling down. So she put the jar on another shelf as she was falling past it. "Well," thought Alice, "after this fall I shall not be afraid to jump from trees." Down, down, down. "Am I falling through the earth?" said Alice. "It will be so funny to see the people on the other side of the earth. Do they walk with their heads down? I shall not know where I am. I shall ask them politely to tell me the name of their country. They will think that I am a very stupid girl." Down, down, down. There was nothing else to do, so Alice soon began to talk again. "Poor Dinah! What will she do without me this evening?" Dinah was her cat. "I hope they will not forget to give her some milk to drink. Dinah, my dear, I'm so sorry you are not here with me. Oh, but what can cats eat here? I'm sure there are no mice in the air." Suddenly the fall was over. Alice jumped to her feet. Before her eyes there lay a long corridor. The white rabbit was running along it. "Quick," thought Alice, "I must be quick." And she ran after the rabbit. The rabbit turned the corner and she heard the words, "It's so late, so late." Alice couldn't run so quickly as the rabbit, and soon it was out of sight. Chapter 2. Alice Grows Small. Again Alice looked about. She was in a very, very large room now. There were many doors in it. Alice tried to open them, but they were all locked and she had no keys to them. "How shall I get out of here?" she thought. Suddenly she noticed a small table which had only 3 legs. There was a little gold key on it. She took the key and tried to open each door again, but the key was too large for some of the doors and too small for the others. Then she saw another little door. She tried to open it with the little gold key. This time the door opened, and Alice saw a beautiful garden. A lot of bright flowers grew there. Alice wanted to get into the garden through the open door, but the door was so small that she could not even get her head through it. "I'm so sorry I can't shut up like a telescope," she thought. Alice waited by the little door for some time and then went back to the table. She hoped to find another key or a book of rules which could teach her how to shut up like a telescope. This time she found a little bottle on the table. She took the bottle and saw the words "Drink me" on it. Alice drank a little. It was nice. She drank some more. Then she drank it again. "How funny," she said. "I think I'm shutting up like a telescope." She was growing smaller and smaller. Very soon she was very, very small, and she thought, "Now I can get to that beautiful garden through the little door." But she was so small now that she could not take the key from the table. She sat down on the floor and began to cry. "I mustn't cry, I mustn't cry," she said to herself. Suddenly she noticed a little box under the table. She opened it and found a very small cake with the words "Eat me" on it. "I'll eat it," said Alice, "and perhaps I shall grow larger after that. Then I'll take the key, open the door, and get into that beautiful garden. Or perhaps I shall grow still smaller, and then I'll get it under the door." Alice took a bite. Nothing happened. She took another bite. But still nothing happened. "Why doesn't anything happen?" thought Alice as she finished off the cake. Chapter 3. The Lake of Tears. "How funny!" cried Alice. "Now I'm opening up like a large telescope. Goodbye, feet." Her feet were almost out of sight now. "Oh, my poor little feet, who will put on your shoes for you now? I can't do it. You're too far away." At this moment her head hit the ceiling. She at once took the key from the table and ran to the garden door. Poor Alice! She could not get through the door because she was too big now. She lay down on the floor and looked into the garden through the open door. What else could she do? Then she sat up and began to cry. "You silly girl," she said to herself. "You mustn't cry. Stop this moment, I tell you." But she cried and cried. Her tears fell one after another. Soon there was a lake around her. Suddenly she heard a noise. Alice dried her tears. She wanted to see who was coming. It was the White Rabbit again. It was walking very quickly. The rabbit was dressed in nice clothes. It had white gloves in one hand and a large fan in the other. The White Rabbit was talking again. "Oh, the Duchess, the Duchess! She will be so angry with me." Alice wanted to get out of the room. She was about to ask the rabbit to help her. When the White Rabbit came nearer, she said, "Please, sir, can you help me?" But she only frightened the rabbit. It stopped for a moment, then dropped its white gloves and the fan and ran away. Alice took up the fan and the gloves. She began to fan her face because it was very hot in the room. Again she began to talk to herself. "Everything is so funny today, and what is the matter with me? At one moment I'm big, at another I'm small. Am I Alice or am I some other girl? And if I'm not Alice, who am I? Am I Ada?" Ada was one of Alice's friends. "No, I'm not Ada. I know so much and Ada knows so little. She's she and I'm I. I know my arithmetics very well and she doesn't. Let me see. 4 times 5 is 12, and 4 times 6 is 13, and 4 times 7 is... I'm sure that this is all wrong. Let me see. Do I know the names of the countries and their capitals? London is the capital of Germany, and Germany is the capital of England. No, this is all wrong. I'm sure I'm not Alice. I'm Ada now. Poor Alice wanted to cry again, but at that moment she looked down at her hands. She saw one of the White Rabbit's little gloves on her right hand. "I put it on when I was talking," said Alice, "but the gloves are very small." "Am I small again?" She looked at her feet and saw that they were growing smaller and smaller. She thought, perhaps I'm growing smaller because I'm fanning myself with the rabbit's fan. She quickly dropped the fan. She was afraid to grow too small again. "And now for the garden," she cried, and ran to the little door. But the little door was locked again, and the little gold key was still on the table. "Now I'm too small, and I cannot get to the key," thought the poor child. "What shall I do?" Suddenly her foot slipped, and in a moment she was up to her neck in water. At first she thought that it was the sea, but the next moment she understood that she was in the lake of tears. "Why did I cry so much?" she thought. "What shall I do now? How shall I get out of this lake?" Suddenly she noticed that something was swimming in front of her. At first she thought that it was a crocodile, but soon she understood that it was only a little mouse. Chapter 4. Where is my cat? "How did the mouse fall into the lake of tears?" thought Alice. "Shall I speak to it? Everything is so funny today. I'm sure the mouse can talk." So she began. "Tell me, dear mouse, do you know how to get out of this lake?" The mouse looked at Alice, but said nothing. "I don't think it understands English," thought Alice. "Perhaps it is a French mouse. Very well, I shall speak French to it." But Alice knew only one sentence in French, "Où me chat?" It was the first sentence in her French schoolbook. So she said to the mouse, "Où me chat?" The mouse suddenly jumped out of water. "Oh, I'm so silly," thought Alice. "Why did I speak to the mouse about a cat? All mice are afraid of cats." "I'm so sorry, dear mouse," cried Alice. "I forgot. I know that mice do not like cats." "You forgot?" cried the mouse angrily. "Don't you know that cats eat mice? How can mice like cats?" "Oh, yes, dear mouse," said Alice. "You are quite right. But my Dinah is a very nice cat. I'm sure you will like her. She's so clean and pretty. She washes her face so often." Alice was talking as she was swimming about the lake. "And Dinah catches mice so—" "Oh, I'm very sorry," cried Alice again, because the mouse was now very angry. "We shall not speak about cats." "We?" cried the mouse. "You spoke about cats, not I. I don't want to hear the word cat." "You will not hear the word cat from me, I tell you," said Alice quickly. "Let's speak about something else. Do you like dogs?" The mouse didn't answer, so Alice began to talk again. "There is such a nice little dog near our house. It has nice long brown hair, and when you throw things it brings them back, and it kills all the rats in the house." "Oh, I'm sorry," cried Alice, but it was too late. The mouse was swimming away from her as quickly as it could. "Dear Mouse," cried Alice, "please come back. We shall not speak about cats or dogs if you don't like them." When the mouse heard these words, it turned and swam back to Alice. It said, "Let's get out of the lake, and then I shall tell you my story. You will understand why I don't like cats and dogs." It was time to get out of the lake, because now it was full of birds and animals. Alice saw a crow, a canary, a flamingo, and a hedgehog. "Let's get out of the lake all together," said Alice. The mouse, the crow, the canary, the flamingo, and the hedgehog swam after her. Chapter 5. Was the mouse's tail sad? When they got out of the lake, Alice was very cold. Her clothes were wet, and she didn't know how to dry them. The birds and animals were as cold and as wet as Alice was. "Which of you can tell us how to get dry?" asked Alice. "I shall make you dry," said the crow. "Let's play games or run a race. Then we shall get dry very soon." But nobody counted 1, 2, 3, run, so they didn't start together. Everybody started and stopped when they liked. After 20 minutes they were quite dry. The crow shouted, "The race is over!" They all sat down. "Who is the first?" everybody asked. "Everybody is," cried the crow. "We must all have prizes." "Yes, everybody must have a prize," cried the birds and animals. Then they stood round Alice and shouted, "Prizes! Prizes!" Alice didn't know what to do. She put her hand into her pocket and found some sweets there. She gave them as prizes to the birds and animals. "But you must have a prize too," said the mouse. "What else have you in your pocket?" asked the crow. "Only a pencil," answered Alice. "Give it to me," said the crow. The crow took the pencil from Alice. Then they all looked up at Alice, and the crow gave it back to her. "We're happy to give you this prize," she said. "They are giving me my pencil as a prize," thought Alice. "It is so silly." But she was afraid to laugh. So very politely she took the pencil and said, "Thank you very much." Then all the birds and animals ate their sweets. After that they asked the mouse to tell them its story. "Tell us," said Alice, "why you don't like C and D." She was afraid to say cats and dogs. "My tail is long and sad," began the mouse. "Oh yes, it is a long tail," said Alice, and looked at the mouse's tail. "But why do you call it sad?" "Oh, you are not listening," cried the mouse. "You are not trying to understand me. You are a very silly girl." And the mouse got up and walked away. "Please come back," said Alice. "Come back and finish your story. We want to hear it." But the mouse only walked a little quicker. "I'm so sorry that Dinah is not here," said Alice. "And, please, who is Dinah?" asked the canary. Alice liked her cat so much that she was always ready to speak about Dinah. So she said, "Dinah is our cat. She catches mice and birds and she eats them." Suddenly Alice saw that all the birds and animals began to walk away. The crow said, "The night air is bad for me. I must go home." The canary said to its children, "Come away, my dears. It is time to go to bed." They all went away, and soon Alice was quite alone. "Oh, why did I speak about Dinah to the birds?" she thought. "I'm sure she is the best cat in England, but nobody likes her here. "Oh, my dear Dinah, how I want to see you!" Here poor Alice began to cry again. Suddenly she heard a noise. "Is the mouse coming back?" she thought. Chapter 6. Alice in the White Rabbit's House. But it was the White Rabbit again. He was looking for something. And again Alice heard the same words. The Duchess, she will be so angry. I'm sure she will tell her soldiers to kill me. But I must find my gloves. Where did I drop them?" "The rabbit is looking for the fan and the gloves," said Alice to herself. She wanted to help the rabbit to find the fan and the gloves. So she began to look about her, but couldn't see them. Very soon the rabbit noticed Alice. He said in an angry tone, "Marianne, what are you doing here? Run home and bring me my white gloves and my fan. Quick, now!" Alice was so frightened that she ran off at once. "He's taking me for his servant girl," she thought as she ran. "How can I know where his house is? But I shall try and find it, and I shall bring him his fan and gloves." She ran as quickly as she could. After some time she saw a pretty little house. On its door she read the name, W. Rabbit. Alice was afraid to meet Mary Ann, the rabbit's real servant girl. She didn't knock at the door, but quickly opened it and went in. She was in a pretty little room now. There was a table at the window. On the table she saw very small white gloves and a fan. She quickly took the gloves and the fan and was ready to go out when she noticed a little bottle that stood near the mirror. This time she didn't see the words "Drink me" on it, but still she opened the bottle and put it to her mouth. "I'm sure something will happen to me," she thought. "Shall I grow larger now? I hope I shall. I don't want to stay as small as I am now." Alice was right. She began to grow larger and larger. Then her head hit the ceiling. Alice quickly put down the bottle, but it was too late. The room was too small for her now. She lay down on the floor. Then she opened the window and put one arm out of it. "Oh, what will happen to me now?" said poor Alice. "It was much nicer at home. There I didn't grow larger or smaller every minute. Mice and rabbits didn't tell me to bring them gloves and fans. Why did I go down that rabbit hole? Somebody must write a book about everything that is happening to me. What shall I do? How shall I get out of this house?" After a few minutes she heard a voice. She listened. It was the rabbit's voice. "Marianne, Marianne," said the rabbit. "Where are you? Bring me my gloves at once." Poor Alice was very much afraid of the rabbit. She forgot that now she was 100 times as large as the rabbit. The rabbit came up to the door and tried to open it, but the door didn't open. Alice was lying on the floor and her back was against the door. The rabbit pushed and pushed the door, but it didn't open. Then Alice heard the rabbit's voice again. The voice came from under the window. "I shall get into the room through the window." "Oh, no, you won't," thought Alice. She put her hand out of the window and tried to catch the rabbit by the ear. She didn't catch it, but she heard a cry and a fall. Then she heard the rabbit's angry voice. "Pat, Pat, where are you?" Another voice answered. "I'm working in the garden, sir." "Pat is the gardener," thought Alice. "Come here," cried the rabbit. Now tell me, Pat, what's that in the window?" "It is an arm, sir." "An arm? What a silly answer! Can an arm be as large as that?" "I'm sure, sir, it is an arm." "Go and take it away," said the rabbit. There was no answer from the gardener for a long time. Then Alice heard his voice. "I'm sorry, sir, I can't do it. I'm sure I can't." "Do what I tell you, you stupid thing," said the rabbit. Alice put her hand out of the window again and tried to catch one of them by the ear. But the master of the house and the gardener were not there. After some time they came back and began to talk again. "What will they do now?" thought Alice. "Will they try to pull me out of the window? No, they can't do that." Suddenly somebody began to throw little stones through the window. Some of them hit her in the face. "I'll put a stop to this," she said to herself, and shouted out, "Don't do that again, or you'll be sorry for that. My cat Dinah will catch you and eat you up." Alice looked at the stones which were lying on the floor round her. "What is this?" she said. "They are not stones, but cakes now." A bright idea came into her head. "I'll try one little cake. I'm sure something will happen to me again. I hope I shall grow smaller." She ate one of the cakes and began to grow smaller. When she was quite small again, she ran out of the house. A lot of little animals and birds were waiting at the door and started after her. Alice ran off as quickly as she could, and soon she was out of sight. Alice ran for some time and at last came to a dark forest. She was very hot and tired. She wanted to rest a little, so she sat down under a tree. Then she took a green leaf and began to fan her hot face with it. When Alice rested a little, she said to herself, "What shall I do now? First I must grow a little larger again. I must be as large as I was at home. Then I must find that beautiful garden with the pretty flowers in it. I think that will be the best plan." Yes, it was a very good plan, but how could she grow larger? She didn't know. Chapter 7. Alice talks to a caterpillar. "I think," said Alice again, "I must eat or drink something. But what?" She looked about. At first she saw nothing that she could eat or drink. Then she saw a large mushroom in front of her. It was as big as Alice was. A large blue caterpillar was sitting on it. The caterpillar and Alice looked at each other for some time and said nothing. At last the caterpillar asked, "Who are you?" Poor Alice thought for a minute and answered politely, "I don't know myself who I am, sir. I know who I was in the morning when I got up, but first I grew big, then I grew small, then I grew big again, then I grew small, and now I can't tell you who I am." "I don't understand," said the caterpillar. "Your words are very silly." "I don't understand it myself," said Alice very politely. "I grow big and then I grow small every 10 minutes. It is very funny." "No, it isn't," said the caterpillar. "I think it is," said Alice again. "You think," said the caterpillar. "And who are you?" "This is the second time that I'm asking you. Will you give me an answer?" Alice saw that the caterpillar was very angry now. She thought, "But I gave it the answer the first time." Now she was angry too. "You must tell me who you are first," said Alice to the caterpillar. "Why, must I?" asked the caterpillar. Alice didn't know what to say, so she said nothing and walked away from the caterpillar. "Come back," cried the caterpillar. "I want to tell you something." Alice turned and came back. "I hope the caterpillar will tell me how to grow larger," she thought. "You mustn't be angry," said the caterpillar. "Is that all you wanted to tell me?" said Alice. For some time the caterpillar said nothing. Then it spoke again. "You say you grow bigger or smaller every 10 minutes. Is that right?" "Yes, sir," answered Alice. "Do you want to stay as big as you are now?" asked the caterpillar. "I want to be a little larger, sir," answered she. The caterpillar got down off the mushroom and went into the grass. Alice waited for some time. Then the caterpillar said, "One side will make you larger, and the other will make you smaller." "One side of what?" thought poor Alice. "The other side of what? I don't understand." She was afraid to ask. "Of the mushroom," said the caterpillar suddenly, and in another moment it was out of sight. Alice looked at the mushroom for a long time. She tried to understand the caterpillar's words. "But the mushroom is round," she thought. "Where is one side and where is the other? I don't know." She broke off a piece of the mushroom with her right hand and another piece with her left hand. Then she took a bite from the piece in her right hand. The next moment she was very, very small. She grew small so suddenly that her chin hit her foot. Alice at once took a bite from the piece in her left hand. The next moment she was very, very big. She could not see her feet now, and she could not see her shoulders. They were too far away. Chapter 8. I'm not a serpent, I'm a little girl. Alice's neck was very, very long now. When she looked down, she could see only her long neck. She could not see her body. "What is the matter with me?" thought Alice. "Where are my shoulders, and where are my poor arms and hands? I can't see them. They're too far away." She tried to put her hands on her head, but she could not do it. Her neck was too long. Then she tried to put her head down to her hands. How nice! Her neck could now turn up and down, right and left, like a serpent. "My neck is like a beautiful zigzag now," thought Alice. "But what is this?" She saw some green leaves before her. "Trees," she thought. "It is nice to have a long neck. I can look at the birds in their nests now." A lot of birds were flying around her head. Suddenly something hit her in the face. It was a bird. "A serpent!" cried the bird. It looked very much frightened. "There is a serpent in the tree." The other birds were also crying, "There is a serpent in the tree. It is looking for eggs." "I'm not a serpent," said poor Alice. "I'm a little girl." "You are a serpent!" cried the birds again, and they all were flying around her head. "We saw little girls before, but they were small. Their necks were short. Their heads didn't hit the trees. We know you are looking for birds' eggs. You want to eat them. You are a serpent." "Little girls also eat eggs," began Alice. She didn't finish because the birds quickly flew away to their nests. Alice thought, They are afraid of me because I look like a serpent with my long neck, but I still have the pieces of mushroom. I can grow small again." She quickly took a bite from the piece of mushroom in her right hand. She at once began to grow smaller. Soon she was quite small. Alice started to walk along the road, and after some time she saw a house in front of her. Chapter 9. The Cat That Can Grin. For a minute or two Alice stood and looked at the house. She didn't know what to do next. Suddenly a servant in livery ran out of the forest. He had the face of a fish, but Alice knew that he was a servant, because he was in livery. He knocked at the door of the house. Another servant in livery opened it. He had a round face and large eyes like a frog. They looked so funny. Alice came a little nearer. She wanted to see and hear better. The fish servant had a great letter under his arm. He gave it to the frog servant and said, "From the Queen. She is asking the Duchess to come to play croquet." Then they bowed to each other. It was so funny that Alice began to laugh. She laughed and laughed. "I must run back into the forest," she thought. "They will hear me." When she came back, the fish servant was not there. The frog servant was sitting on the ground near the door. He was looking up into the sky. Alice went up to the door and knocked. "Don't knock," said the frog servant. "I am on this side of the door. Who will open the door for you? And the people in the house are making such a noise that nobody will hear you." He was right. There was a great noise in the house. They were shouting and sneezing. They were breaking dishes and plates to pieces. "Please," said Alice politely, "how can I get into the house?" There was no answer from the frog servant. "How can I get into the house?" asked Alice again. "I shall sit here for a long time," answered the frog servant. "I shall sit here all day." At this moment the door opened and a large plate flew out of the house. It hit the servant's nose, fell on the ground, and broke to small pieces. "I think I shall sit here all day tomorrow too," the servant said in the same tone. He was looking up into the sky all the time, and Alice thought, "I'm sure he doesn't see what is happening in front of his nose, because he's always looking up." "How can I get into the house?" asked Alice a third time. "Why do you want to get into the house?" asked the frog. Alice didn't like his tone. "All these animals talk too much," she thought. But the frog servant didn't wait for her answer. "I shall sit here," he said, "many, many days and nights." "But what shall I do?" asked Alice. "What do you want to do?" asked the frog. "Why am I talking to him?" thought Alice. "He's very stupid." And she opened the door and went in. She was in a large kitchen now. It was very hot there. The Duchess was sitting in the middle of it on a chair which had only 3 legs. She had a baby in her arms. The cook was cooking something in a large pot. "The pot is full of soup," thought Alice, "and there is too much pepper in that soup." She began to sneeze. And she sneezed and sneezed because there was pepper in the air. Even the Duchess sneezed. The poor baby was sneezing all the time. It cried and sneezed, sneezed and cried. But the cook didn't sneeze. A large cat was sitting on the floor. It was grinning from ear to ear. "Please, will you tell me," asked Alice politely, "why your cat grins?" "Because it's a Cheshire cat," answered the Duchess. "Pig." She cried out the last word so suddenly that Alice jumped up. The next moment she saw that the Duchess was speaking to the baby and not to her. Alice began again. "How funny that cats can grin!" "They all can," said the Duchess, "and most of them do." "I didn't know that," Alice said very politely. She was glad to talk to the Duchess. "You don't know much," said the Duchess, "and that is a fact." Alice didn't like her tone. She wanted to talk about something else. Suddenly, the cook began to throw plates and dishes at the Duchess and the baby. The Duchess didn't look angry when they hit her, but Alice jumped up and cried, "Oh, what are you doing?" "You may play with the baby for a few minutes if you like. I must go and get ready to play croquet with the Queen," said the Duchess, and threw the baby at Alice. Alice caught the baby and went out with it into the open air. "I must take this child away with me, or they will kill it," thought Alice. The baby was not crying, but suddenly it began to grunt like a pig. "Don't grunt," said Alice. "You are not a pig, you are a baby." But when she looked at the child, she saw that it was not a baby. It was a little pig. "What shall I do with a pig at home?" thought Alice. "No, I can't take it with me." She put the little animal on the grass, and it ran away into the forest. Alice walked into the forest. Suddenly she saw the Cheshire Cat. It was sitting in a tree. The cat asked Alice, "Will you play croquet with the Queen today?" "I like to play croquet very much," answered Alice, "but I don't know the Queen, and the Queen doesn't know me." "You will see me there," said the cat, and disappeared. Alice waited for some time, and after a few minutes the cat appeared again. "By the by, what became of the baby?" asked the cat. "It became a pig," answered Alice. "That's right," said the cat. Suddenly, the end of the cat's tail disappeared. Then its body disappeared. Then its head. Now Alice could see in the air only the cat's grin. But soon the grin disappeared, too. "Well," said Alice, "I know many cats without a grin, but a grin without a cat, how funny!" Chapter 10. Alice and an Egg. Alice saw a white wall in front of her. There was a very large egg on it. For a few minutes Alice stood and looked at the egg. She was very hungry and wanted to eat it, but suddenly it began to grow larger and larger. Alice came nearer and saw that the egg had 2 eyes and a nose and a mouth. "Oh, it's Humpty Dumpty," thought Alice. "I read all about him in a book. Humpty Dumpty was sitting on the wall." "I'm afraid he will fall," thought Alice. She was standing in front of the wall with her hands ready to catch him. "You look very much like an egg," she said. "Why do you call me an egg?" he asked. "I don't like it." "I do not say you are an egg, sir. I only say that you look like an egg. And some eggs are very pretty." She said it because she wanted to be polite. But Humpty Dumpty was not looking at her. He said, "Some people are very silly. They are like babies." Alice didn't know what to say to this. If he's talking to me, why is he looking at the tree and not at me? She thought. She laughed, and then she began to say to herself, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty together again. Don't stand and talk to yourself, said Humpty Dumpty, and looked at Alice for the first time. What is your name? And why did you come here? My name is Alice. It's a stupid name, said Humpty Dumpty. What does it mean? Can names be stupid? Asked Alice. Oh, yes, they can. My name is not stupid because it means that my face is beautiful, and my body is beautiful. What does your name mean? Nothing. It's better to speak about something else, thought Alice. Are you not afraid to fall down? She said. That wall is so very high. No, I'm not afraid, cried Humpty Dumpty. The king will send all his horses and all his men, Alice finished. How do you know about the king's horses and the king's men? Said Humpty Dumpty. I'm sure you like to listen at doors and behind trees. I'm sure you heard the king's words. I didn't listen at doors and I didn't listen behind trees, said Alice. It's in a book. I read it. I think you read about me in the history of England. Now take a good look at me, and don't forget that I spoke to a king once. And Humpty Dumpty grinned from ear to ear. When he grins, thought Alice, I'm afraid that the ends of his mouth will meet behind his head, and then I don't know what will happen to his head. I'm afraid it will come off. Now tell me, said Humpty Dumpty, how old are you? Alice thought a moment. She counted her years and said, I'm 7 years and 6 months old. 7 years and 6 months, repeated Humpty Dumpty. Now, if you want to know what I think, don't grow older. It is nice to be 7 years old. Alice didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. Then she spoke again. You have a very beautiful belt, she began. Or is it a tie? No, I think it's a belt. I'm sorry. She saw that Humpty Dumpty looked very angry. How can I know, she thought, which is his neck and which is his body? He's almost round. Humpty Dumpty was very angry. He said nothing for a minute or two. Then he spoke again. It's very bad when a child doesn't know a tie from a belt. I know it's very stupid of me, said Alice. It's a tie, child, and a very beautiful tie. It's a present from the king and the queen. They gave it to me as an unbirthday present. What is an unbirthday present? Asked Alice. It's a present which you get on a day that is not your birthday. Alice thought a little. I like birthday presents better, she said at last. You don't know what you are talking about, cried Humpty Dumpty. How many days are there in a year? 365, said Alice. And how many birthdays have you? 1. And if you take 1 from 365, how much will you have then? Then we shall have 364 days. Are you sure that it is right? Asked Humpty Dumpty. If you have a piece of paper and a pencil, write it down on paper, please. Alice took some paper and a pencil from her pocket and wrote down 365 minus 1 equals 364. Humpty Dumpty took the piece of paper and looked at it for a very long time. I hope that's right, he said at last. Now you can see that there are 364 days when you can get unbirthday presents and only one day when you can get birthday presents. That shows that it is better to get unbirthday presents. Alice could not say anything to that. Now you see, said Humpty Dumpty again, that you are not so clever as I am. I'm sure I can repeat poetry better than you. Sit down and listen to me. I want to repeat a piece of poetry. Poor Alice didn't want to listen to poetry, but she said politely, "Thank you," and sat down. Chapter 11. Alice listens to poetry. In winter, when the fields are white, I sing this song for your delight, began Humpty Dumpty. Only I don't sing it, he said. I see you don't, said Alice. You can't see songs, you can only hear them, said Humpty Dumpty. Alice answered nothing to this. He will grow angry again, I'm afraid, she said to herself. In spring, when woods are getting green, I'll try and tell you what I mean. Thank you very much, said Alice. In summer, when the days are long, perhaps you'll understand the song. In autumn, when the leaves are brown, take pen and ink and write it down. I'll try not to forget it, said Alice. Now, listen, I shall say another piece, said Humpty Dumpty. I sent a message to the fish. I told them, this is what I wish. The little fishes of the sea, they send an answer back to me. The little fish's answer was, we cannot do it, sir, because— I'm afraid I don't quite understand, said Alice. Listen, and you will understand later, said Humpty Dumpty. I sent to them again to say, it will be better to obey. The fishes answered with a grin, why, what a temper you are in. Then someone came to me and said, the little fishes are in bed. I said to him, I said it plain, then you must wake them up again. I said it very loud and clear. I went and shouted in his ear. As Humpty Dumpty was repeating the last words, he shouted them. Alice didn't like it. Why is he shouting? She thought. It is not nice. I took a pencil from the shelf. I went to wake them up myself, and when I found the door was locked, I pulled and pushed and kicked and knocked. And when I found the door was shut, I tried to turn the handle, but— Here Humpty Dumpty stopped. After a few minutes, Alice asked, Is that all? Yes, that is all, said Humpty Dumpty. Goodbye. How funny, thought Alice. The end of the poem is so silly, but she said nothing about it to Humpty Dumpty, because she was too polite for it. Then she got up and said, Goodbye, I hope we shall meet again. I don't want to meet you again, said Humpty Dumpty. I don't like your face. You have the same face as everybody has. 2 eyes, the nose in the middle of the face, the mouth under the nose. I think that the nose under the mouth, or the 2 eyes on the same side of the nose, look much nicer. No, said Alice, they don't. But Humpty Dumpty was not listening to her. He was not even looking at her. So she said goodbye a second time and walked away. Chapter 12. The Queen's Garden. Now, said Alice, I must get into that beautiful garden with pretty flowers in it. But how shall I find it? She looked about. There was a big tree near her. She noticed that the tree had a door in it. She opened the door and went in. Again she was in the long room with the small door in it, and again she saw the little table. The gold key was still lying on it. Now I shall open the door at last, thought Alice. She quickly took the gold key from the table and opened the little door with it. But she could not get through the door because she was too large for it. So she took a bite from the piece of the mushroom in her right hand, and at once she grew small. Now she could get through the open door. She was in the beautiful garden at last. A lot of bright, pretty flowers grew in the garden. In one corner she saw a large rose tree. The roses which grew on it were white. 3 gardeners were standing around the tree. They were quickly painting them red. Alice stood and looked at the gardeners for a long time. "I don't understand what they are doing," she thought. She came up to the gardeners and asked them very politely, "Will you please tell me, why are you painting these white roses red?" The 3 gardeners looked at Alice and said nothing. Suddenly she saw that they were not real people. They were cards. Yes, they were cards. One of the gardeners was 5, the other was 7, and the 3rd gardener was 2. How funny, thought Alice. They are only cards. But where are the other cards from the pack? "You see, miss," 2 said at last, "this was a mistake. We put a white rose tree here, but the Queen doesn't like white roses. She likes only red roses. We are afraid of her. We are afraid she will cut off our heads. Everybody is afraid of her. Every minute she cries, 'Off with his head!' or 'Off with her head!' So we are painting these white roses red. We hope that the Queen will not notice our mistake." At this moment 5 cried out, "The Queen! The Queen!" The 3 gardeners at once fell down on their faces to the ground. Alice looked about and saw a big procession of cards not far away. The cards were walking 2 and 2 and hand in hand. First Alice saw the soldiers. After the soldiers she saw kings and queens from the pack. Suddenly she noticed the White Rabbit. He was talking to a queen and didn't see Alice. Then the Knave of Hearts passed by, and at last Alice saw the king and the Queen of Hearts. "Shall I fall down on my face too?" thought Alice. "No, I shall not do it. And what's the use of a procession if you can't see it?" So she stood where she was and waited. Soon the procession came nearer. All the cards stopped and looked at Alice. The Queen of Hearts looked at her too and asked, "Who is this?" She said it to the Knave of Hearts, but he only bowed and said nothing. "Idiot," said the Queen. She turned to Alice and asked, "What is your name, child?" "My name is Alice, your Majesty," answered Alice very politely. But she said to herself, "They are only a pack of cards. I mustn't be afraid of them." Then the procession came up to the 3 gardeners. They were lying on their faces round the rose tree. "And who are these?" asked the Queen. She asked this because the gardeners were lying on their faces, and the Queen could only see their backs. But their backs were the same as the backs of all the other cards. "Are they gardeners or soldiers? Or who are they?" cried the Queen angrily. "How can I know?" answered Alice. "I know nobody here." She thought, "Perhaps my answer is not polite, but I am not afraid of her. She is only a card." The Queen looked at Alice for some time like an angry dog. Her face grew red. Then suddenly she shouted, "Off with her head!" "How silly!" said Alice. The King put his hand on the Queen's arm and said, "My dear, she is only a child. You must not forget it." The Queen turned away from him angrily and said to the Knave of Hearts, "Turn them over." The Knave did so with one foot. "Get up!" cried the Queen. The three gardeners jumped up at once. They bowed and bowed for a long time. "Stop it!" cried the Queen. She looked at the rose tree and said, "What were you doing to that tree?" Two bowed and said, "Your Majesty, we were trying to—" But the Queen didn't listen to him. She only said, "Oh, I see." Then she turned to the soldiers and cried, "Off with their heads!" The Queen and the procession went on. The soldiers wanted to catch the gardeners, but the poor gardeners ran to Alice and cried, "Help! Help!" "I shall help you," said Alice. "They will not cut off your heads." And she put them into a large flower pot that stood near. The soldiers looked for the gardeners here and there, but could not find them. So after some time they started after the procession. Alice ran after them. "Can you play croquet?" shouted the Queen suddenly. The soldiers didn't answer but looked at Alice. Everybody looked at her too. Alice understood that the Queen was asking her, but not the soldiers. "Yes," she answered, "I can." "Let's begin then," said the Queen. "It's a very warm day," a small voice said behind her. Alice turned and saw the White Rabbit, who was walking behind her. "Very," said Alice. "Where is the Duchess?" "Hush, hush," said the Rabbit. He looked about and then put his mouth to Alice's ear. "The Duchess is in prison. They will cut off her head." "Why?" asked Alice. "She boxed the Queen's ears," the Rabbit began. Alice laughed. "It is so funny," she said. But the Rabbit was frightened. He said to Alice, "Oh, hush! The Queen will hear you. You see, the Duchess came late and the Queen said, 'Off with her head.' Then the Duchess—" At that moment the Queen shouted, "Get to your places. Let's begin the game." All the cards began to run from one end of the croquet ground to the other and back. They pushed each other. They fell down and got up and fell down again. At last the game began. Chapter 13. The Queen's Croquet Ground. It was a very funny croquet ground, and it was a very funny game. There were no real croquet balls there. The croquet balls were hedgehogs. The players had flamingos in their hands, and they hit the hedgehogs with the heads of the flamingos. Alice also had a flamingo in her hands. She tried to hit a ball with its head. Only it was not a real ball, but a hedgehog. But every time that she wanted to hit it, the ball ran away. All the players played at the same time. They ran after their balls, and their balls ran away from them. Yes, it was a very funny game. Soon the Queen grew very angry. She shouted every minute, "Off with his head," or "Off with her head." Alice said to herself, "I don't like this Queen. I'm afraid she will cut off my head. I must get away from here." Suddenly Alice noticed something in the air. At first she could not understand what it was, but after some time she understood that it was a green. She said to herself, "Oh, it's my friend, the Cheshire Cat. I'm very glad to meet it again. At last I can talk to somebody." Soon Alice could see the cat's mouth, then the nose, and at last the eyes. When the eyes appeared, she bowed. "How are you?" said the cat's mouth. But Alice didn't answer. She thought, What is the use of an answer if the cat has no ears? It cannot hear my words. I'll wait a little. I hope its ears will appear soon. Then I'll speak to it." She waited for some time. Then the cat's ears appeared. Alice could also see its head now. She put down her flamingo and began to speak about the game. She was very glad to talk to a friend. "I don't like the game," Alice said. "I think that the players play very badly. They don't know how to play croquet. They shout all the time and they don't listen to each other. Then I don't like to have hedgehogs for balls because they run away." "And how do you like the queen?" asked the cat. "I don't like her," answered Alice. "She plays very—" At that time Alice stopped because she noticed the queen. The queen was standing behind her. She was listening. So Alice finished her sentence. "She plays very well. She plays better than all the other players." The queen grinned and went on. Then the king came up to Alice and said, "I see you are talking to somebody," and he looked up at the cat's head in the air. "It's one of my friends, a Cheshire cat," answered Alice. "Will you speak to it, Your Majesty?" "I don't like its face," said the king, "but it may kiss my hand if it likes." "I don't want to kiss his hand," said the cat. "You are not polite," said the king. "Don't forget that I am a king, and don't look at me like that." "A cat may look at a king," said Alice. "I read that in a book once." At that moment the queen was passing by again. "My dear," cried the king, "please tell the soldiers to take this cat away. I don't like its face." The queen didn't stop. She did not ask why or what is the matter. She only said, "Off with its head," and passed on. "I must find a soldier who will cut off the cat's head," said the king, and walked off to look for a soldier. "Shall I stay here or shall I go back to see the game?" thought Alice. "I'll go back and finish the game. But where is my ball? Where is my hedgehog?" Her hedgehog was fighting with another hedgehog. "Very well," thought Alice. "I shall hit one hedgehog against the other. But where is my flamingo?" Her flamingo was at the other side of the garden, and she ran there. When she caught her flamingo at last and came back to the croquet ground, the hedgehogs were not there, so she went back to talk to the Cheshire cat again. When she came back, she found there the king, the queen, a soldier, and a lot of other cards. They were all talking at the same time, so Alice could understand nothing at first. The soldier said, "The cat has no body. I can't cut off its head because it has no body." The king cried, "The cat has a head, so you must cut it off." The queen shouted, "You must cut off the cat's head, or I shall tell the other soldiers to cut off all the heads here." Alice saw that all the players were frightened. Everybody turned to Alice. "You tell us which of us is right," said the king, the queen, and the soldiers at the same time. At first Alice didn't know what to say, but then she said, "It is not my cat. You must ask the Duchess about it. It's her cat." "The Duchess is in prison," said the queen to the soldier. "Go and bring her here." The soldier ran off at once. But now the cat's head began to disappear. First its ears disappeared, then the eyes, and then the mouth. Soon the soldier came back with the Duchess. "Where is the cat?" asked the queen. The king and the soldier began to look for it, but couldn't find it. So all the players went back to the game. Chapter 14. The Duchess talks to Alice. Now the Duchess noticed Alice and went up to her. "I'm so glad to see you again, my dear," she said. Then she put her hand on Alice's arm, and they walked away together. "She's very nice today," thought Alice. "I'm very glad she's not angry with me now. I'm sure that she was angry that time in the kitchen only because there was too much pepper in the soup and in the air. She was sneezing all the time, and it made her angry. In my kitchen there will be no pepper. I'm sure that pepper makes people angry, and sugar and sweets make them nice and happy. People must give children more sweets and sugar. Then everybody will be nice to each other, and everybody will be happy." Alice thought about those things so long that she forgot all about the Duchess. Suddenly she heard the voice of the Duchess. The Duchess was saying into her ear, "What are you thinking about? Why don't you talk to me?" And the Duchess put her chin on Alice's shoulder. Alice didn't like it because the Duchess had a very sharp chin, but you know that Alice was a very polite child, so she said nothing about it. "My dear child," said the Duchess, "shall I put my arms around you and give you a kiss?" "You mustn't do it," said Alice quickly. "My flamingo bites." "Then I shall not do it," said the Duchess. In a moment she said again, "I want to make you a present. I'll make you a present of everything I say." "A very silly present," said Alice to herself. "I'm glad I don't get birthday presents like that." "Oh, my dear," said the Duchess, and put her sharp chin on Alice's shoulder, "you are again thinking." "I have a right to think," said Alice. She was getting angry with the Duchess. "Because," began the Duchess and stopped in the middle of the word. Alice looked up and saw the Queen in front of them. The Queen was looking at the Duchess like an angry dog. "A nice day, Your Majesty," began the Duchess. "Be off at once, or your head will be off," shouted the Queen. The Duchess was frightened and ran off at once. "Let's go on with the game," said the Queen to Alice. Alice was afraid to say no to the Queen. So the Queen and Alice went back. When they came to the croquet ground, the players were resting. But when they saw the Queen, they jumped to their feet. The Queen looked at them angrily and said, "Let's begin at once, or I shall tell the soldiers to cut off your heads." The players began to play at once. Every minute the Queen shouted, "Off with his head," or "Off with her head." The soldiers took the players away, and by the end of an hour only the King, the Queen, and Alice stayed on the croquet ground. Suddenly they heard a cry. "The trial is beginning." "Let's go to the courtroom," said the Queen. "It is time to begin the trial." "What trial is it?" asked Alice. But the Queen only answered, "The Knave of Hearts tried to steal my tarts." Then the King and the Queen walked off, and Alice started after them. Chapter 15. Did he steal the tarts? The King and the Queen were sitting on their throne. A lot of little birds and animals were standing round the throne. All the other cards of the pack were there too. The Knave of Hearts was standing before them in chains with a soldier on each side. Near the throne stood the White Rabbit with some long paper in its hand. In the middle of the courtroom there was a table with a dish of tarts on it. The tarts looked so good that Alice became quite hungry. "I hope they will soon finish the trial and everybody will get a tart," she thought. Alice was in a courtroom for the first time. but she knew all about trials from books. She thought, "I'm so glad I know the name of everything here. That is the judge because he has a great wig on his head. Oh, the judge is the king, and those 12 birds and animals are jurymen. I'm sure that very few little girls know the word juryman." The 12 jurymen were writing something on pieces of paper. "What are they writing?" asked Alice. "The trial is only beginning." A card which was standing near Alice answered, "They are writing their names. They are afraid that they will forget them before the end of the trial." "Stupid things!" said Alice. And she saw that all the jurymen wrote the words "stupid things" on their pieces of paper. "Read the accusation," said the king. The White Rabbit began to read. "The Queen of Hearts, she made some tarts, all on a summer day. The Knave of Hearts, he stole those tarts, and took them quite away." "Read the sentence," the king said to the juryman. "It is too early," said the rabbit. "We must call the witnesses first." Suddenly Alice began to grow larger again. At first she wanted to get up and go away. Then she thought, "No, I shall stay and see the trial to the end." One of the witnesses was the cook of the Duchess. She had a pepper box in her hand. When she came to the door, the people in the courtroom began to sneeze at once. "Tell us what you know," said the king. "I shall not," said the cook. Then the king said, "What do you put into tarts?" "Pepper," answered the cook. "Sugar," said a voice behind her. "Who is making a noise in the courtroom?" shouted the queen. "Oh, it's the mouse! Catch that mouse! Off with its head!" Everybody tried to catch the mouse. The noise in the courtroom lasted for a long time. When it was over, there was no mouse and no cook in the courtroom. "Never mind," said the king. "Call the next witness." "Who will be the next witness?" thought Alice. Suddenly the White Rabbit cried out the name, "Alice!" Chapter 16. Alice Gets Angry. "Here!" cried Alice. She forgot how large she was now. She jumped up so quickly that she pushed the table where the jurymen sat. The poor jurymen fell down on the floor, and there they lay and could not get up. "Oh, I'm sorry," cried Alice. "The trial cannot go on," said the king angrily. "You must pick them up and put them in their places." Alice began to pick them up, and when they were in their places, the king said to Alice, "Do you know how and when the Knave of Hearts stole the queen's tarts?" "I know nothing," answered Alice. "Nothing?" "Nothing," said Alice again. "That's very bad," said the king, and turned to the jurymen. The jurymen began to write in their papers, "Very bad." At this moment the king got up from his place and began to read out from his book. Rule 42. All people who are more than a mile high cannot stay in the courtroom. They must go away. Everybody looked at Alice. "I am not a mile high," said Alice. "You are," said the king. "You are 2 miles high," shouted the queen. "No, I'm not, and I shall not go." "Off with your head!" shouted the queen. "Who is afraid of you?" shouted Alice. "You are only a card from a pack." Suddenly all the cards flew up into the air. Then they began to fall down on Alice's head and face. She grew frightened and angry at the same time. She tried to fight them off, and she gave a little cry. Suddenly she heard her sister's voice. "Wake up, Alice, dear! What is the matter?" Alice opened her eyes. She was lying on the grass under a tree. Some yellow leaves were falling down on her face from the tree. "Oh, what a funny dream!" said Alice. And she told her sister about the white rabbit, about the Duchess, and about the Queen of Hearts. She told her all the funny things that happened in her dream. "Yes, it is a funny dream, dear," said her sister. "And now let's run home. It's time for tea, and Mother is waiting for us."